I made this kind of chart of, and this is particularly for comprehension. So on the x-axis here, we have how good your comprehension is, and these are mapped to stages of the MBJ method. And then we have your enjoyment over here. So here's the chart. I'll show it again in a second, but here I have it kind of mapped out. So again, this is mapped to the stages, the MBJ method. So stage 1, you're mainly consuming comprehensible input content, and you're acquiring the fundamentals very quickly. So of course, your mileage is going to vary, but this is based on my experience for Japanese and Chinese. So overall enjoyment of the language learning process, 7 out of 10. So the language is new and exciting, right? You just started learning a new language. You're looking forward to maybe being fluent one day. It's new and exciting. You have a honeymoon period, and you're improving very quickly, and you can feel it. So overall, very enjoyable. Next stage, this is what I call the dark night of the soul. These are terms from like Buddhism or spirituality, but obviously I'm using them metaphorically. So you reach this point where you've gotten most out of what you can of comprehensible input content. And so, when you go and watch comprehensible input content, it's basically too easy for you now. There's not very much left to learn. But even the easiest domains of native content are still too hard. So your overall enjoyment of the language learning process, 3 out of 10. So the initial excitement of learning a language has worn off. You can tell you're improving, but it just feels like such a far away achievement of being able to actually enjoy native content. Yeah, this is probably what I consider to be the least fun part of the entire language learning process. And unfortunately, it hits you really early. And this is probably why so few people actually get fluent, because I think most people drop out right around here and they never get on to the next stage, because it's arguably the hardest part of the language learning process. And I'm going to talk about, what tools do we have to deal with this in a second. So next, later on in stage 2, maybe halfway around stage 2, you get stream entry. So this is the word in Buddhism for the first stage of enlightenment. At this point, you have 1 or 2 domains of native content that you can understand pretty comfortably. If you watched Finley's update video that he made a couple weeks ago, this is kind of sounds like where he's at. I think he said, was it 600 hours? He reached this stream entry point where he was like, it's still limited what I can watch. I can't just go and watch whatever I want. But there's at least some domains of truly native content that are actually comprehensible and enjoyable. And so overall, I put the enjoyment of 6 out of 10. So we're definitely on the uprise now. Wasn't as fun as the pure excitement from the very beginning, but it's relatively enjoyable, So the process is working and you're proud of what you've achieved, right? You've kind of overcome the big sense of like, is this actually going to work? Is this immersion thing not crazy? Is it actually possible for me? For the most part, you've seen that it works, and you just kind of have to continue doing what you're doing. But, the domains that you can understand and that you're working with are pretty limited, and you often get bored of sticking to these domains. So, it's still a little bit of a grind, but definitely you're outside you're on the other end of the tunnel. So if we're trapping this here now, so that was right here. And then you get to the Goldilocks zone. So this is the best part of the whole process. So you have multiple domains you can understand comfortably, and you're able to smoothly ladder to more and more difficult content, right? So you're improving really quickly. You're constantly conquering new microdomains, moving on to new microdomains, and you're really comfortably understanding most of the content you're enjoying. But you're also you're improving really rapidly, because there's still lots that you don't know. So you're kind of at this perfect balance of you understand enough to not be lost, but there's still enough that you don't know that you can improve really quickly. And because of this, you're at maxed out enjoyment, 10 out of 10. So you're enjoying your content, and you're enjoying how rapidly you're improving. That's like very satisfying. So it feels like you've just reached language learning enlightenment. This is probably when you're going to go to all your friends and start trying to, tell them that they should learn a language or something, or try to tell them about immersion. And if you see any immersion or anyone learning a language using like Duolingo, it'll be really hard to not like give them a lecture or something. And basically, it kind of feeds on itself, because all you want to do is immerse more, because you have this really strong sense of every hour I put in, I get a lot out of it. And so, of course, you want to keep doing as much as possible, because you want to improve even more. And so, yeah, that's like right here. So I would say when I first came back from Japan, when I was in high school, I was like right here in between. And then like a year later, I was like right here. So this is like my fondest memories of learning Japanese, just being in my room, grinding all day and getting better super quickly. It was like, constant dopamine boosts and like addictively fun. So then you get to stage 4 where you're fluent. So now you can understand most domains comfortably, but there's still a lot that you don't know. Improvement becomes a lot slower now, because the things that you know are rarer and show up more infrequently. But consuming content feels so enjoyable that maintaining momentum is a lot more easy. So you're still like learning the language pretty actively, but it's starting to shift to I'm just consuming content. But still that learning component is still kind of always there in your face. And so yeah, overall enjoyment of the language learning process, 7 out of 10. So now in terms of enjoyment, you've caught back up to where you were at the very first stage. So things are starting to feel similar to watching content in your native language, but it's still annoying that there's occasionally things you don't know that get in your way. But that's largely offset by the pleasure of still getting to learn new things and grow your knowledge. So you can see now you've passed the peak, you're still pretty up there. And then at stage 5, you're basically native-like. So consuming content, it feels the same as your native language. You still regularly pick things up, but you know so much that the learning aspect of things kind of falls into the background and you barely notice it anymore. So it's just like your native language. So overall enjoyment of the language learning process, 8 out of 10. So you miss the adrenaline rush of the Goldilocks days, but you're content with your ability. So how much you enjoy it pretty much depends on how able you are to find good content. Because just like in your native language, it's good when you watch good content, it's fun. When you're watching something boring, it's boring. And yeah, so this is kind of what I consider the whole arc of the language learning process. So the unfortunate reality is the final point is not the most fun part. The final point is right there in the middle. And I think that's why so many people who get good at one language start learning another language, is because they want to get back to that high. It's like chasing the dragon of that when things were at the peak, when it was so fun. I have super fond memories of this, and it seems to be true to all the other people I know that kind of went through this hardcore language learning process. But it still ends up pretty good, you know. But the real thing to talk about is how do we get over this stage 2 here, the dark night of the soul, because this is probably the biggest problem that people face. It's where the most people drop out, and it's probably where there's the most room for iteration in the language learning process, I would consider. So how do you go from the dark night to stream entry, which is kind of this problem. This is a meme that I took and quickly had ChatGPT remake. But basically, yeah, here's the question: is we're here. This is where we are, comprehensible in content. This is where we want to be, native content. How do we get there? The first point I think to say is I don't think it's fully realistic to be able to smoothly ladder to this point. So in an ideal world, there would be content, a wealth of content that exists in this area that you can use to get to that point. And maybe eventually comprehensible input Japanese or other people will create this content, or maybe we can use AI to create this content. Maybe this problem is a solvable problem that probably will be solved in the not too distant future. But as of today, it's not solved. So because there's just a lack of content that is at this perfect level, I don't think trying to smoothly ladder there is realistic. So instead, I think what we have to do is employ strategies to grind it out. So I would continue watching comprehensible input content on the side, but I wouldn't make it your main thing. I think the main thing is diving into content that's a little bit too hard for you and finding some way to grind it out. I think that's what you have to do, because if you don't remove the training wheels, you're never going to get there. Like if you just keep watching comprehensible input content forever, that's never going to get you to the other side of this bridge, So first of all, limit your domains. Pick some domains very intentionally that you want to try to use as a way to get over this hump. So, slice of life or romance anime is good. Probably not fantasy anime. YouTube vlogs about everyday life topics could be good. It could be a content about a specific topic, like a hobby or something, but just make sure that it's not inherently difficult for you. So, if you're a physics major, then watching Japanese videos on physics actually could be a pretty good comprehensible domain for you. But if you don't understand physics well, then physics videos are going to be way too hard, because not only is the content going to be hard, but the language is going to be hard for you as well. So if you have a hobby that you know everything about, for you personally, that could be a good domain to use. You don't have to limit it too much. You can have a range of things, but overall try to have a sense of like the range you're trying to focus on, and focus mostly on those. That's going to help. Be ready to tolerate ambiguity. That's going to be a big one. I think doing primed repetition and then listening, once you've primed to listen to something once, take the audio and listen to it on repeat passively. And then also for that domain, mine a lot of cards, ideally with auto mining or some other setup, but like, be actually learning the words from that particular domain in Anki. So again, these are not a perfect solution, but basically the best thing we have now is combine all these together to grind it out, get to stream entry, and then it will pretty much be smooth sailing from there. So another thing is just keep in mind that if you're right here, you're not always going to be here. you're going to be here, and then you're going to be here. So you just kind of have that in mind. I think it can help you kind of grind it out. Like even for Chinese, that will help me. That helps me knowing that like, okay, it's not going to be like this forever. A lot more quickly than I think. If I just keep this up, I'm going to get out to the other side. And then the whole process is going to start moving exponentially faster because I'm going to want to put in more time. It's going to be easier to learn new things once because I have everything in place, and everything's going to get a lot better. Once you do reach stream entry, then the most efficient way to improve is to smoothly ladder your way to more and more difficult content. So once you get to the other side where there's at least some content that's comprehensible to you, I would never go back to watching content that's way above your level and you're just lost. Once you have at least a couple real native domains, you should be able to just smoothly ladder your way, like go to things that are I+1, 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 and get basically all the way to understanding everything. There could be some exceptions in there. Maybe you want to skip a step 1 or 2 times because there's a domain you're super eager to get into, and so you employ prime listening and stuff in that particular case. So you don't have to be, super strict about this, but as a general principle, laddering your way by I+1, then it becomes I+0. The thing that used to be I+2 is now I+1. You consume that, and you just I+1 your way more and more. That's going to be the most efficient way to get better and improve and acquire the language. So once that becomes an option for you because you've made it past the dark soul and you're at stream entry now, then I would try to stick to that as much as possible. That's what's going to be most efficient. If there's something too hard, then just let it be. Find something that's just a little bit above your level, but still it's largely comprehensible, and just keep laddering that way. Basically, that would be the optimal strategy for now. And then maybe in the future, there'll be eventually enough content that you can just you just ladder all the way right from the beginning because there's enough content to do that. That would be the ideal.